Brad, you're recognized. Thank you, brother.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you and the ranking member, but also all the panelists for being here today. This has been very helpful and informative. I want to pick up on what, Mr. Lord, you said in your opening remarks. I appreciated them talking about the Jewish traditions of mourning, and our tradition is really centered around this idea of zachor, memory, and it's through that we keep generation to generation, the spirit alive. We are coming on to the one-year anniversary of October 7th. Immediately after that is Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish year, where we remember all those who came before us that we have lost. But the high holidays, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, Sukkot, which was connected to the October 7th attacks, is also a time of renewal. And I appreciate your remarks about a vision for peace and security for Israelis, Palestinians, and everyone in the region. I think that's really what we're here talking about at its core. Is there a way, in the way I frame it, of breaking free from the gravity of the history of this region, so much of the history of this region, to create a path to peace, or are we stuck in a cycle of war? And at the core of that cycle of war is Iran, who, with support of Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, I can go down the list. They are the single largest sponsor of terror and the threat to peace, which is why we are here today. And October 7th, a year ago, was not an isolated incident. It was a pinnacle. The timing was also not by accident. Saudi Arabia and Israel were this close to normalizing relations, and who loses from that most? But it would be Iran and their aspirations for chaos within the region. Iran's role can't be overstated. Tehran has long funded, armed, and trained Hamas and the other terrorist organizations, enabling them to launch attacks on civilians and disrupt the hope for peace. We're currently facing a very real threat of a second front opening in the north against Hezbollah, between Israel and Hezbollah. Hezbollah has 150,000 or more rockets, many of which are precision guided, poised to escalate. We saw this week Israel, in a clandestine attack, detonate the pagers of Hezbollah. Anyone who had one of these was connected to Hezbollah, was a member of a terrorist organization. Well, not everyone, because the ambassador from Iran to Lebanon also had one of these Hezbollah pagers. Why is Iran communicating in a terrorist communication chain with this? And there's tens of thousands, nearly 100,000 people in Israel on the north evacuated from their communities. I met with many of them yesterday. They can't go home because of the threat from Hezbollah. And until we relocate the Radwan fighters away from the border to the north of the Litani River, there's not going to be peace. And we can talk about Iran, and we touched on that, or not Iran, Yemen, and we touched on that. Yemen is a wild card in all of this because, yes, they are being armed and funded by Iran. They also overtook all of Yemen's government's weapons, and they aren't necessarily going to just listen to Iran. In all of these threats, we're left with the threat of a nuclear Iran. And I have questions. I'm looking at the time. I want to get to these questions. But we cannot allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. We've been fighting this or working against this for now more than a generation. And Iran has kept marching forward. Ms. Filippetti, you talked about the anniversaries. It was Iran and Hezbollah who bombed the Marine barracks. It was Iran who bombed the Jewish Community Center in Argentina. I was there for the 30th anniversary. It is Iran that is expanding and building its nuclear stockpiles, but also working to develop all the other aspects to have a nuclear weapon, which threatens the region. And a war with Iran today is nothing compared to what a possible war with Iran would be if they have a nuclear weapon. We cannot allow that to happen. So we have to see a different path forward. And the Abraham Accords are a piece of that. We've talked about that, building on those opportunities. Many of us are part of the Abraham Accords caucus, bicameral, bipartisan. In fact, today we'll have a meeting with the ambassador from Saudi Arabia and a bipartisan group of members from the House to talk about that different vision. My broad question, and everyone's gone long, so I'm going to ask for some indulgence here. I'll start with you, Mr. Abrams. We talk about Iran can't have a nuclear weapon, but we are, for 25 years, we've been trying policies and different tactics. What can we do to make our policies more effective? You touched on some of those earlier. What do we need to do? How can we make Iran understand that the United States are deadly serious, that our allies are deadly serious, and we will take whatever actions necessary?
Thank you. First, I think, as I said before, I think both presidential candidates should say this.
Absolutely.
And particularly, more important, whoever is elected should say it. And I think we should take the military moves that suggest to Iran that we are serious. For example, having the force structure there. Because I think if they think we're really serious, then they may not cross the threshold.
Just go down the line.
Sanctions only work if they are on the books and if they are enforced, so that's certainly a first start. We also have other tools available to us. You know, we don't have to be talking about airstrikes on Iran necessarily. We have lots of cyber tools. We can build human asset tools. There are ways to dismantle programs once they exist, or ways to prevent the acceleration of the program that perhaps won't cause mass casualties.
Thank you, Congressman. I would only add, I agree with both of my co-panelists. I think a lot of this has to do with constraining the resources that Iran has in order to commit acts of terrorism. When you look at the threat again from the Western Hemisphere, we have seen many Iranian spies and terrorists who have attempted to plan for attacks on American soil from their position in Latin America. So that means we need to deny the Iranian regime the resources that it needs in order to fundraise for these attacks. That's why I think, in addition to the 2231 snapback that Mr. Abrams mentioned, it's also important to work with friendly jurisdictions to make sure that they are also sanctioning not only the IRGC, but also Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, other terrorist entities. I also think that we need to look at shifting to a full terrorist designation for the Houthis, given the severity of their attacks on global shipping.
Okay. And Mr. Lord, in 2 seconds, because I'm getting the hook here.
Very quickly, sanctions are being enforced, and they are being as effective as they could be. Iran is getting better and more capable at evading those sanctions. Sanctions themselves are a tool, they're not a policy. We need to think much more broadly. Finally, I'll say this president has been very effective in deterrence. I think we had a moment here, we could have seen a repeat of April 13th after Hania was killed. But the presence of two carrier strike groups, and not only that, but the messaging about all the stealth capabilities, F-35s, F-22, a guided missile destroyer. These are first strike capabilities. And obviously it's not going to get talked about publicly, but I'm fairly convinced that Iran was put on notice, and President Biden had his hand on the holster and made it very clear. Deterrence can be effective.
Thank you. I'll close with this, Mr. Chairman. Sanctions are most effective on their first day, and whoever's under sanctions are going to try to get around them. We need to ratchet them up. And I will, last thing say, with the USS Abraham Lincoln and Theodore Roosevelt, among the escort ships was the USS Cole. The irony should not be lost that the ship that Yemen tried to destroy a generation ago was defending the U.S. interests and our allies' interests, including Israel, this summer. And let all know that the United States stands prepared, and that's our committee's responsibility. We will not allow Iran ever to have a nuclear weapon. I yield back.